Grüß, willkommen in einem Aufregens video, or welcome to yet another exciting video, in this case episode 3 of my Wargaming Rules Review series of videos. In this video I'll provide an overview of the PRESTAGS board game, printed by SPI in 1975. This video is a review of the SPI PRESTAGS board game. While this is a board game, I will also cover how players can convert this board game into a figure gaming format. As any player can download the SPI rules, maps and counters, no actual set of rules will be provided, as any player can perform their own conversion. Many players I know actually play the exact rules as they are, with figures on a playing area with large hexes. You may also be asking at this point, why am I reviewing a board game? While this video series is designed for figure gaming, I have decided to review a board game for two reasons. The first is that this board game was my introduction to ancient battles back in the mid-1970s. While it did not involve figures, at least for me, it did give me a taste for ancient battles which continue to grow. The second reason is I've converted this board game into a figure gaming format. This was mainly due to Lost Battles, which started as a board game but which has more often than not played as a figure game, but was also due to the ease of converting PRESTAG into a figure gaming format. In fact, I initially started by playing the exact PRESTAG rules on a playing area with large hexes and terrain, and using figures because I thought it looked a lot better than the actual board game figures and map, which quite frankly is really underwhelming. Now let's drill down into this rather interesting board game or set of rules if you're going to use figures. For those who do not know what PRESTAGS is, it's a series of 5 board games printed by SPI back in the 1975. PRESTAG means pre-17th century tactical game system. PRESTAG comes in 4 periods: Chariot, Spartan, Legion, Viking and Yeoman, each of which covers a different period. The system uses standard rules for all the period, but does have special rules for each period. PRESTAG was in turn based on a number of earlier similar board games. Phalanx, which was printed in 1971, covered the period 480 BC to 110 BC. Centurion, which came out in 1971, covered the periods 106 BC to 552 AD. Dark Ages, printed also in 1971, covered the periods 700 AD to 1200 AD. Armageddon, printed in 1972, covered the periods 3000 BC to 500 BC. These 4 earlier board games, while they were roughly related, were different board games with differences in the game system. PRESTAGS was an attempt to bring all these games into a single game system which could cover 5 significant periods. This shows the PRESTAG chariot maps with some units on it. This map allows a player to refight a large number of different scenarios using different parts of the map. The period covered in this game, or in this version of PRESTAGS, is 3000 to 500 BC. This map here shows the PRESTAGS Spartan map. Once again, several scenarios could be played on the map using different parts of this map. This covers the period 500 to 100 BC. This shows the PRESTAG Legion map, covering the periods between 100 BC to 700 AD. As you can imagine, it generally covers the Roman Empire and their various battles. And once again, there's a wide range of different scenarios, all of which can be played in different parts of the playing area. This shows the PRESTAG Viking map, which covers the period 700 to 1300 AD. Once again, lots of scenarios, all played on different parts of this playing area or playing map. Yeoman was added to the earlier games. I suppose when they designed PRESTAG, they wanted to add some additional period or extend the period, but this shows the PRESTAG Yeoman map, which covers the period 1250 to 1550 AD. If we look at the Legion map in more detail, you'll notice it's covered by letters ranging from A to N. Each scenario will use different letters for setup purposes. As an example, the Numidia 106 BC scenario will use the letters A and B. One will be the Romans, one will be the Numidian deployment areas. For each of the periods, or each of the 5 games, players are provided 2 identical counter sets for each of those periods. This shows the chariot counters. There is some minor differences between the different periods in terms of units. So, for example, chariots would not be present in yeomen, for example, or even probably in the Legion game. However, most of the pieces in PRESTAGS are standards. The pieces in PRESTAGS are divided into a number of different classes, starting with Class A, which is what you see here. This class represents spearmen, starting with militia, militia spearmen, professional pikemen, light troops, and experimental phalanxes. Class B represents blade troops, starting with barbarian infantry, swordsmen, and axemen. Class C represents cavalry, starting with light cavalry, medium cavalry, and heavy cavalry. Class D represents specialist troop types such as Viking fleets, elephants, and chariots. Class E represents commanders, ranging from level 1 to level 6. We now move to missile troops. Class F, uppercase F, and lower class F represents missile troops which are foot, starting with bowmen, improved bowmen, skirmishers, ballista, crossbowmen, arquebuses early, arquebuses late, and finally longbow. The last class is also missile. It's the M class with lower class F. That represents mounted missile troops and artillery, starting with horse bow, oriental cavalry, Byzantine cataphracts, heavy artillery, and light artillery. Interestingly enough, when I did the research for this video, I discovered a more modern board game called Fight of the Fall, which uses counters almost the same as PRESTAGS, down to the values. These counters look a lot nicer than the original game, but nonetheless I digress. Let's now look at the units in more detail, starting with the melee units, which are Class A to D troop types. Each unit, or counter, consists of a melee strength and a movement allowance. Some of these units have a melee strength in square brackets, which means that that shows its attack strength, but its defense strength is half this value. When we move over to the missile units, the fire units, or Class uppercase F, or uppercase M with a lower class F afterwards, also have a melee strength and a movement allowance, but they also have a fire strength and a fire range. The final class, or unit class, or Class E, are the leaders or commanders. These also contain a melee strength and a movement allowance, but also have a combat bonus and movement control radius or command radius value. We've covered the units and map. Let's look at the actual game system. The best way to understand any game system is first look at its sequence of play, which has some interesting attributes for this particular game. The first point is this uses a sequential sequence of play. One player is nominated the first player in any game turn, and that player starts off the sequence of play. The first phase is the fire combat phase, where the phasing player, that is the first player in this case, conducts fire combat. This means that player needs to have set up his missile troops in the previous game turns in order to be able to fire this game turn. One interesting thing about missile fire in these rules, which confused me initially, is that you're firing into the hex, and it's the hex which has a defense value. It does not matter what type of unit is in the hex, its defense is that of the terrain in the hex. So you can see here the typical defense strength when in clear terrain is 3. If we look at the fire units, let's say a skirmisher, which typically has a fire strength of 2 and a fire range of 1, and if we look at the combat results table, you're really looking for odds of at least 1 to 1. As a result, you need, in this case, 2 skirmish units if you want to have a chance of affecting a target unit. If you manage to achieve odds of 1 to 1, then you have a 50% chance of disrupting your target. If your target is disrupted, its melee capacity is reduced, so while missile fire in this case will not eliminate an enemy, if you close into melee, you will have an advantage and have a high probability of eliminating that disrupted enemy unit. The next phase is the movement phase, which allows you guessed it, move. This could be moving into melee, or moving into fire range, or running away, or just strategically moving. It's just movement. If you do move into contact with an enemy element in order to engage in melee, the enemy can conduct defensive fire, but only if it has not already conducted fire combat. So some tracking of fire combat is required. Fire combat during the fire combat phase is a form of offensive fire combat. That was the previous phase. While defensive fire is, you guessed it, a form of defensive fire. The next phase is the melee combat phase. If opposing units are in adjacent hexes, they can conduct melee. The same combat results table is used for melee as for fire combat, so you are looking for odds of at least 1 to 1, if not more. Let's look at a specific example. If a spearman unit is engaged with the barbarian unit, on the first round of melee, the barbarian has a melee value of 6 against the spearman value of 4. If you could get 2 barbarians against a single spearman, you could achieve odds of 3 to 1, which is a very good odds. At odds of 3 to 1, you have a 1 in 3 chance of not achieving anything. There's always that chance. 1 in 3 chance of disrupting the spearman, and a 1 in 3 chance of actually achieving a half eliminate result. The latter means, or the half eliminate result means half of the defenders are eliminated, which in this case would be in the entire unit, because there's only one unit. In most cases, units are stacked, so you would have between 2 to 4 in a hex. As a result, maybe 1 to 2 would be removed. Any troops remaining would be disrupted, so this would still be this is a disaster for the defender. One point to raise is any unit disrupted twice is eliminated. So if the spearman was disrupted by missile fire and then suffered disruption again, it would be eliminated. The double disruption is the holy grail of the game system, as well as trying to achieve odds of more than 4 to 1 or 5 to 1, where you can get eliminate results. The final phase is simultaneous and conducted by both players. Any disruptions, except those in the current phase, are removed. So any previous disruption from previous game turns are removed and the unit returns to its normal state, while the disruptions that occurred in the current player turn do remain and could influence things in the following player turn. The second player now repeats the process. This sequence of play seems rather simple, but its simplicity lies, or within its simplicity lies cunning elegance. You need to play a few games to realize how it works, and I feel it works very well indeed. Of course, this is only a very brief view of the rules, and if you're really interested, you would need to study the rules in greater detail. The only real downside of the board game is the playing area is boring, and you end up playing in odd corners of the entire playing area, which is also rather annoying. Many gamers have created specific playing areas only for the specific scenarios being covered, and these work rather well. They often use much larger counters or create larger counters and larger hexes in order to do so. The other downside is that the actual board game encounters also don't look very nice and are actually rather boring. The new, more modern versions of the game system do improve the aesthetics, but I would prefer larger counters. The other issue is I'm not a big fan of stacking counters, and I feel the troop range and types are rather limiting. But apart from this is a very good board game and well worth a try if you're interested in ancient combat. You may now ask yourself, and it's a valid question, this is an ancient board game which is no longer in print. Well, actually, it is a rather old board game, but when I say ancient, I mean it covers an ancient period. How do I ever get a chance to play it? This is a good question. As I have all the games I can indulge myself, others without the board games cannot. One solution is to purchase a second-hand copy of the board game. This may not be a good choice, but is open to players if they so desire. The other more viable option is you can download the board game PDFs from the SPI Wargame Resource website. This will give you the rules and some of the maps. You'll need to print the maps somehow, but that shouldn't be a big problem. Another option is you could purchase Fight the Fall, which does give you one of the periods covered by PRESTAG, but only one of the periods. You could also convert the board game into a figure gaming format, as I have, or try P17CW, which is a totally rewritten version of the PRESTAG rules designed for figures and using DBMM army lists. While these rules are old and as such not available, some information about the rules can be found in the Shown IO group site, and it's possible to download the rules from the internet using the link below. Second-hand copies of the board game may also be available in eBay or other sources. And so we come to an end of episode 3 of my video series of Wargaming Rules Reviews, in this case a specific analysis of the Prestag board game. Alle guten Dinge, kommen zu einem Ende.